to the chaos, because that's what you've got. You've got total and complete chaos. You've got double talk. You've got people saying one thing 1 minute, another thing another minute. The regime here, this is why we put the UK debate, because I think it's put in high relief what's going on. You cannot lead, when people don't believe you, when you've lacked trust, restrictions on liberties. Who's going to lead us through this crisis here in the United States? The complete regime's economic program is collapsing. Their Build Back Broke, throw money everywhere. Social justice warrior program collapsing. They've now pivoted to, they understand, they've looked at the polling, which is brutal, the worst in presidential history ever in a first year. They're now saying, hey, we got to federalize the elections. They understand they have to steal this election, steal elections to win. They're trying to push 800,000 non-citizens in New York City to vote. And you just got to go through all the world's newspapers, right? Omicron, this. Of course, in South Africa, they just announced the hospitalization rates, I think, are 1.7%. Only 26% of South Africa has been vaccinated. CDC last night says, the only vaccine you actually have is J&J. Remember, the other two are experimental therapies. They said, hey, don't take the J&J. If you have other alternatives, do not take it because of blood clots. Complete and total chaos. Fauci's out there spinning, saying one thing one moment, another thing another. CDC is saying one thing, FDA another. Biden is in his fear. They're throwing up fear porn. Want to bring in Raheem Kassam. This is the fog of war. This is where you need to be very focused, very calm, very stable. Right? You need to be the still point in the turning world, and that is what the war room is, and the war room audience, the cadre, the posse, this great audience. We are the still point in a turning world, and right now it is a world spinning out of control. Raheem Kassam, your observations. We're going to get to this major vote yesterday in the United Kingdom and what it portends for people that are not authentic here in the United States in politics. But I want your assessment first of the chaos. And this is what happens when you have feckless leadership. Elections have consequences. Stolen elections have catastrophic consequences. And the United States of America, welcome to Thunderdome. Raheem Kassam.
Well, I think, not to jump the gun on yesterday's circumstances in the United Kingdom a little bit, but I think everybody who's running now or who's campaigned on this Build Back Better, as you say, Build Back Broke program is going to suffer. They're going to suffer electorally. There's a new Rasmussen reports poll out that I was looking at just now that shows that the majority of respondents say that they are following the news about the Build Back Better plan very closely. And in general, 45% say they oppose and 38% say they support. That is amongst likely voters from Rasmussen reports overnight. So 17% say they're unsure. I'm pretty sure those 17% will land on the side of opposing the legislation. But I think across the Western world, you're seeing everybody who stood in front of a lectern with a Build Back Better sign in front of it or a step and repeat behind them is going to find themselves in deep electoral doo-doo, like Boris.
What about the pandemic? Your thoughts? We got about a minute, then we're going to go to break.
Yeah, it goes back to a lot of what Sam Harris was alluding to, right? Which is the idea that there is some ulterior motive to centralize power using the pandemic as the key apparatus behind that. And I think when you look at all of this now and you see the lack of scientific method behind a lot of these decisions, the public is now looking at it and going, well, we were happy to go along with it in the first instance, or maybe not so happy, but we were going to go along with it in the first instance. Now the rules change just about every day. Different states are doing wildly different things. Different nations are doing wildly different things. And the places that have had the most antediluvian and totalitarian measures appear to be the ones suffering most, especially with the new Omicron variant. So I think the chaos is leading to people sort of turning their backs. Again, I think, you're right. The Build Back Broke tier of people out there are the first ones who are going to be turfed out. And it's, the freedom caucuses and the equivalent in the United Kingdom who are now gaining the trust of the public.
By the way, you're very perceptive on the ones that have been most draconian are now the ones that are most out of control, New York City being that. Short commercial break. We're going to be back in the war room. Ben Harnwell, Raheem Kassam, Stephen K. Bannon in a moment. Okay, it's Friday, 17th December, year of our Lord, 2021. Boy, I love our Christmas music. If that can't get you into the holiday spirit just does not reside in you. In a world of chaos, and that's what we have right now, and the elites, the ruling class, the apparatus, the globalist. Remember, you saw Boris Johnson right there. Boris Johnson is a Tory. Boris Johnson is supposed to be a conservative. He's bragging there at the end, hey, they jabber, we jab. And he's talking about the vaccine policies, his vaccine mandates, taking liberty away, the vaccine passport. He's bragging about it. And he paid consequences last night, big consequences. You're in the war room. I want to go to Raheem Kassam. So this is why we do this, because Europe moves at about 3 or 4, 5, 6 months ahead of us, particularly during this pandemic. You know, Brexit and Trump's victory in 2016 were inextricably linked. What's going to happen next year in the French and the Brazilian are also connected, because things tend to move in the Judeo-Christian West in a certain way. You know, Cenk the other day said, why does he care about birth rates in France? That's why you got 5.5% in your primary when you ran, Cenk. You don't understand anything. You don't get it. You know the price. The price of everything and the value of nothing. So, Raheem, a certain tectonic plate shift is taking place right now as the conservatives are being weighed and measured by exactly how they lead right now. And you're seeing this right now. Biden's being weighed and measured and absolutely failing. This is why it's a time for people with authenticity that can see through the fog of war, that can be a still point in a turning world, to step up and to actually give guidance to folks about, hey, here's how we got to get through this thing, because I'm telling you right now, it's going to spin more and more and more out of control in this dumpster fire of the economy. They're going to try to spend more money. They're going to try to bury us in debt. It is catastrophic, and we will never recover if we go down the path of this feckless regime. What happened in the UK, Raheem, that was so important last night?
So I'm very glad we teed this up over the past couple of days, because it could quite easily have been ignored, as it has actually been ignored across international media. I think the War Room, probably more than any other broadcast out there, has managed to be ahead of this story, at least outside of the United Kingdom. There was a special election that we discussed a few days ago that was brought to pass by the resignation of a member of Parliament who had himself been implicated in the form of sleaze scandal, Conservative member of Parliament. The seat that he represented was a hardcore Conservative party. We use the term Tory and Conservative interchangeably. Tory party seat that actually the Tory party had governed within for almost 200 years, undefeated. That all changed last night.
Hold it. Repeat that for people. All the way back almost to our revolution. 200 years. 200 years through depressions, wars, global conflicts, the fascists, the communists, the Industrial Revolution. 200 years in a tradition of folks, and this is what we talk about, folks, 200 years as a conservative seat, Raheem Kassam.
And don't forget, the most interesting part of it is 200 years despite having had some pretty crappy members of Parliament at some points in time. You know, that is the most likely thing to change the way a seat is, and yet it didn't. These people who live in the North Shropshire constituency had stuck with the Conservative Party, again, for almost 200 years until yesterday. And that tells you something about the chaos at the heart of Johnson's government, the lack of trust at the heart of the average Conservative voter in the Conservative Party. And the problem now, though, is that despite this, and despite what we can quite easily glean if you are willing to pay attention to the detail of why the seat went to the Liberal Democrats yesterday, the news media in the United Kingdom and the government itself, including Boris Johnson, is attributing the loss to completely different things than I would. You know, this is the same thing that happened with David Cameron's Conservative Party. Took power in 2010, formed a coalition government, leaned so far away from conservative values in any way, shape or form. And you name it. You talk about marriage, borders, anything. they leaned so far away from that the ordinary working and middle class conservative-minded voter started to vote for groups like the UK Independence Party, started to look elsewhere of how they could cast their vote. And that very same thing is happening today. You know, there are so many interesting takeaways from this massive flip. Remember, the Conservatives had a 23,000 vote majority in that constituency. Not only did the Liberal Democrats overturn it, it wasn't even close. At the end of the night, Helen Morgan, the Liberal candidate, got 18,000 votes, and the Conservative candidate only got 12,000 votes. So this is the biggest swing now that we've seen since 1993, and it's the second biggest swing since the Second World War. It is an absolute shellacking for Boris Johnson.
I got to tell you, these tremors. I want to bring in Ben Harnwell now. Ben, walk us through your assessment. You spent many years in Parliament. How big a deal is it? I'm going to get to the point that this shows you when people are in power and people feel chaos, they feel no leadership, they feel like they're being spun, you're going to have blowback. And this is going to show you what 2022 could be if we get our act together. Ben Harnwell.
Yes, Steve. Well, Raheem's absolutely right. This is an indicative result showing the lack and the loss of trust in Boris Johnson and his government. It is the second largest swing since the Second World War from Liberal Democrats to Conservatives, and the seventh largest swing from the change in a by-election from any party to another. It's a catastrophic defeat for Boris Johnson, a swing of around 34% away from the Conservatives to the Liberal Democrats. Now, there are a number of potential readings as to the nature of the anger that had built up in this rural constituency on the English-Welsh border, consisting largely of rural market towns. Now, on the one hand, it would be a legitimate interpretation to see this anger as being the government is increasing its coronavirus limitations and restrictions, and yet the virus has never been so out of control. And potentially, one can say, therefore, the government has erred by not having significant enough restrictions. On the other hand, there's the other interpretation saying people are angry because despite all of the restrictions, the virus is still out of control. Let's just confront the reality that the virus isn't going away, and open the country again, come what may. Some people will die, but we can go back to our normal lives. And this is the point about a by-election. A by-election in the UK is, unless there's an overwhelming local issue in the election, it's a referendum on the government. The government has lost, as it were, this referendum. And the overwhelming observation...
Listen, you saw it right there, is that Boris Johnson put vaccine passports in. He's proud about having the toughest vaccine program in all of Europe. He's rolled it out for everybody else. He bragged about it. They jabber and we jab. We vaccinate and they vacillate. Then he puts in the vaccine passports, takes the liberty away of Englishmen and women, and he gets shellacked, and the virus is out of control. Isn't that? Am I missing it, Ben or Raheem? You guys, jump in here. We got about a minute. Am I missing it? It seems pretty straightforward to me. It's out of control more than it's ever been out of control in the United Kingdom, and he's the guy that's putting in vaccines. He's crushing people's liberty and not having any success, zero success. Ben Harnwell first.
Right.
Ben, we got about. Go ahead.
That's absolutely right, Steve. I mean, I would say this is the archetypal Tory stronghold, and the fact that it changed hands for the first time since 1832 is really illustrative of the fact that the CCP virus is now changing the British electoral landscape.
Yes. Ben, how do people get to you on social media? We got a punch. I want to come back to Raheem because I'm going to talk about herd immunity. Let me tell you what the inside baseball is. You're hearing from UK already. This thing is more transmittable, but not as lethal. This is going to get us to herd immunity. The apparatus doesn't want to talk about that. But they're all doubling down today. You don't hear Fauci talking about that. Natural herd immunity. What you hear them talking about is more vaccines. When CDC's coming out and say, oh, by the way, the one vaccine, Johnson & Johnson, don't take it. You got to take the experimental gene therapy. Ben, we're going to get your social media up in the next block. Thank you very much. Ben Harnwell from Europe in Return with Raheem Kassam. This is central. You take people's liberties away with no improvement of their station in life, tougher economic lockdowns. They don't care about 200 years of precedent. They're going to throw you out of office. Be back in a moment in the War Room. Okay, welcome back. In this Christmas season, when people do have, with all the Christmas parties, things like that, in those quiet moments, you do get a chance to reflect, particularly as the year comes, and think about the year, put it in perspective, and look forward, and count your blessings and how your life has had the intervention of divine providence, and what you're grateful for, gratitude and grace. You know, we're 6 weeks away from the Beijing Olympics. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, the Berlin Games of 1936, the people and the individuals in the Chinese Communist Party that wrought this on the world. And Lancet magazine today has got a big Raheem Kassam and Natalie Winters from earlier this year, but also from 2020. Now you got Lancet admitting to their lies and misrepresentations. But there's something profound and there's something deep going on here. And what you have are these professional politicians, and you have these globalists, these neoliberal neocons. They're going to do anything to stay in power. And they don't know what to do. They're like chickens with their head cut off. They do understand one simple thing. The more that they can stimulate an economy with cash from central banks, they can delay the ultimate outcome of the collapse of their economies and then being thrown onto the streets. And so what they do is they understand that, but they don't know how to handle and how to confront what the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA have done here and be serious about it and be adults about it. What you saw with Boris Johnson is you had a conservative sit there and brag about this vaccination policy that he's rolling out. And we now know from CDC, hey, let's just admit it. We just don't know about these vaccines. And Navarre and those guys know about it. Malone, those guys will tell you when they first started, particularly the vaccine part of it, which is the J&J. They normally take, 5 or 10 years? And they're coming out with a different announcement every day. Now it's like, don't do it because, there's 10 people or 9 kids that we got that have, 9 people that have had blood clots. And I've known people that have had blood clots. They've scared them to death. And yet they pass a vaccine passport that takes away the central liberties. And Raheem, I would say, I don't know an English political history, and I'm not an expert like you, but I don't remember outside of a war where they've actually taken that type of liberty away from people who have been fighting for liberty for thousands of years. And it has a payback in a seat that for 200 years has voted with the Tories. For 200 years, from 1832, has said we've had enough, and it's not just on the margins. It completely flipped. They gave him the middle finger. We've had it. We vote for stability, and we vote for order. We don't vote for this chaos. And we certainly don't vote. These are not small things people are doing. What they're doing with the finances, and by the way, they're coming for another massive stimulus because they're going to shut this whole thing down. You watch it. When I think the science and the data and the evidence will tell you coming out of the UK and South Africa that this is our way to herd immunity. Yes, this is very transmissible, but it doesn't look like it's near as lethal as the previous mutations of the CCP virus, the CCP bioweapon. So you'll get to herd immunity. They won't mention, have you heard any of that? Have you heard one word of that on CNN or MSNBC of any scientists that have come out here? That, hey, I think that this math may work out. No, but you got Boris Johnson, a quote-unquote conservative, and Raheem, I remember this, the Tory majority was brought to you by Nigel Farage and Raheem Kassam because of Brexit. But Raheem, I remember you actually, I think, went to Parliament and gave a speech in one of those side rooms warning against Boris Johnson and saying this was going to happen. So Boris Johnson is the Joe Biden in this situation. This is the established order, and this is what the established order does. It's more chaos. It's more fear. It's not thought through. And it's not presented to you as an adult. It's not presented to you with evidence and data and science and facts. And here's where we are, and here's what we have to do, and here's the financial consequences of it. It's all spin and treating you like morons and idiots. And this is why there's going to be a tectonic plate shift if the Trump movement takes leadership here and addresses the Hispanic community and the African American community and have them join us and say, we can't do this anymore. They have to be, Shropshire? They have to be say, hey, we've done this. We've backed you for decades and decades and decades, and now you're out of control. Raheem Kassam.
So you've got to look at the front pages of the newspapers in the United Kingdom today. Take The Sun, for instance, right? One of the biggest tabloids, largest in circulation, and traditionally seen as at least leaning towards the political right. The Sun's
it's Murdoch's.
Headline,
That's Murdoch's paper. The guy that owns Fox.
Yeah.
That's in the New York Post. That's Murdoch's paper, The Sun.
Yeah. The headline is, "It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas," hinting at another lockdown. The Times, another Murdoch paper. Sunak, which is the Chancellor, in talks on bailout for pubs and restaurants. The Eye newspaper, UK shuts down in bid to save Christmas. The Metro newspaper, Queen cancels Christmas lunch. The Daily Express, Queen sets example by calling off Christmas party. It goes on and on like that. This is another kind of iteration of what we called during the Brexit campaign Project Fear, except this time, instead of the government introducing mandatory lockdowns, what they're doing is simply propagandizing lockdowns, and the media is assisting them with it. Now, this goes partly to what Boris Johnson, i.e., they called Boris Johnson for so very long, and it grinds my gears to this day. They called him the British Trump, right? He was nothing of the sort, was never anything of the sort. And let me correct you on something there. My speech was supposed to be in the British Parliament, and a member of Parliament actually cancelled our room booking in Parliament because they knew what I was about to say. And I'm actually going to grab the clip, and we'll make sure we play it at some point in the next couple of days here.
Wow.
Because what I said back then, 2 years ago, was if you give Boris Johnson's Conservative Party a whopping big majority in Parliament, they will use it against the ordinary Conservative voter. And that is exactly what's going on right now. If you go into the detail of some of the reportage that's been taking place from the streets of North Shropshire, let me read from somebody who lives in the town of Market Drayton, in that constituency. He said, quote, "Our police station has closed, our ambulance service is closed. We've got one doctor's surgery for the whole of the Whitchurch area, where they're planning another 5,000 to 7,000 houses to be built in the next 3 or 4 years. And that is as a result of mass migration. What is happening under this Conservative government is what has happened under every out-of-touch Tory government that has been, which is stealing people's local services away and flooding their neighborhoods with mass migration. That is what Boris Johnson has done. So you've got the lockdown part of this. You've got the hypocrisy part with Boris Johnson throwing 7 parties over the lockdown over the last Christmas period. And you have that big mass migration element of all of this right now. Now, here's the really interesting part to me of what happened last night in North Shropshire. Yes, we talked the other day about how the right is now split. You've got the Heritage Party, the Reform Party, the Reclaim Party, the For Britain Movement, the UK Independence Party. If you added all of their votes up together, I think it added up to about 6 or 7% of the vote share in North Shropshire. Not a heck of a lot. But if you put that 6 or 7% into action in other seats where the margin is 2-3% for the Conservative Party, then suddenly Boris Johnson's Tories get very, very scared indeed. So that's what needs to happen. First, these parties all need to get together and fight for the same cause. And second, they need a leader. I think that leader has to be somebody like Nigel Farage, because if you go from 6 or 7% without a major figure like that, you go to 15 or 16% with somebody like Nigel Farage. Now, it only took victories of 12, 13 and 14% results in local elections, European-wide elections and national elections back in 13, 14 and 15 for David Cameron to promise a referendum. Of course, what did that referendum do? It got us out of the European Union. So imagine what you could do if you were able to put 15, 16+% of the electorate together in all of these seats to push back against Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. That is what I think is going to be happening over the next 3 months in Britain. It's going to be a very exciting time for people who love freedom, at least.
Yes, and this is why Nigel Farage, who's been, I think, the greatest leader since Thatcher in modern British politics and is a great man and got the sovereignty of Englishmen back by getting out of the European Union. It's now time for Nigel to step to the forefront. Raheem, this is what happens when you have neoliberal neocons in charge. Remember, they have a overwhelming majority in the UK. It's exactly what Biden and they have here, and they do not deal straight with people. They do not give you the evidence. Look what's happened in the UK. You can see they're building up to lockdowns. They've already got vaccine passports. What they're going to do, although it's the vaccinated that are getting infected here, I think at a greater rate, they're going to push even more. They're going to double and triple down. Biden can't walk it back. They're all into the fact that even last night, MSNBC, only Rachel Maddow briefly talked about this bombshell on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. They're so all in with Fauci. They're so all in with the CDC and the FDA and Big Pharma that they're not going to be able to do a pivot back to something that's backed by science, like herd immunity. They're going to continue to double and triple down. Your thoughts and analysis.
Well, it's no surprise that Johnson & Johnson were the ones who hired the fewest lobbyists at the beginning of all of this. You know, we did a story recently about the sheer scale of lobbying increase and money being spent in Washington, D.C. by Pfizer and then Moderna in turn. Pfizer is spending inordinate amounts of money on political lobbying at the moment and hiring, by the way, critically hiring people who had worked for very powerful people. So you have people who are working in the office of the speaker who are now working for Pfizer, lobbying people in the office of the speaker, right? So that is why you're seeing so much movement so quickly and easily, so much lubrication on Pfizer's behalf right now. The other part I just wanted to get to as well is you're absolutely right. We need to maybe put this into further context for people. Why are we spending so much time talking about the United Kingdom and a small by-election in a small town in the West Midlands? And that is because Biden is Boris and Boris is Biden, right? These two people's world beliefs are inseparable. When you saw them at the G7 together with Jill and Carrie, inseparable. They both stand in front of lecterns that say the same thing, build back better. They both believe in the same things. They both talk the same talk on Russia and Ukraine and all of that, inseparable. So what Boris is going through now, Biden can expect in the near future. And that is really the crux of it.
Here's what you're going to see, too. They're pivoting hard because they've only got two ways to stay in power. Either give you free stuff with this audience's money or to grab control of the voting apparatus on a federal basis because they understand on a state. Right now, they understand that we are so empowered. We are see a sense of such urgency that at the local level, right, where people are volunteering to become precinct committeemen, to become election officials. They're running for the county commissioner, the county clerk. They're losing it at where the election is supposed to be. From the ground up, they're lost all that apparatus even at the state level. They have to come in now, and now it's panic mode. They're gonna try to. They've been forced to drop Build Back Better, pivot to the grab of the election because their days are numbered. Their days are numbered, and they're going to spin Omicron. And the place you're going to see it spun most is Washington, D.C. and New York City. Wait for it. Short commercial break. Back with Raheem in a moment. Okay, thank you very much. Getter is the platform that's going to connect us all because, trust me, they're going to come in. They're going to do another whole wave of deplatformings as this thing heats up in 2022. And you see with the collapse of this regime's economic program, the economy out of control, inflation out of control, their social justice plan collapsing, having to try to now grab on, federalize the elections because the only way they're going to win, or they think they're going to win. It is more chaos every day. But as much as they talk about, they will not focus on one of the central things for us to get through this is to get to the bottom of what happened in the Wuhan lab, to get to the bottom of the bioweapon program of the Chinese Communist Party, to get to the bottom of what actually what the genetic code of this virus is, and to force that, and to have all the nations of the world enforce that. And you've had, once again, the neoliberal, neocon global apparatus has locked arms to defend the Chinese Communist Party and lied about it. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud to be in association with National Pulse, with Raheem Kassam and Natalie Winters. And today, right? Massive story in the Daily Mail, Lancet. I want you, and if Denver can tee it up as Raheem talks. Raheem, tell us what went on now with the now admitting the lies and misrepresentations that you and Natalie, I remember it was from January, February this year, but even back in the spring of 2020, almost 18 months ago, going on 2 years ago, you guys were all over about the origins of this and what happened to this and how all the scientific community locked arms to defend the Chinese Communist Party. Raheem Kassam.
Yeah, that's right. Well, something incredibly untoward is going on at the Lancet, and it will come as no surprise to people who have followed the Lancet's work quite closely over the last several years, especially given who is associated with it. I'll give you an example. The Lancet Medical Journal's COVID-19 Commission was chaired by your good old buddy, Jeffrey Sachs. And it's no surprise that when you look at the people who have been involved with this COVID origins investigation that has been led by the Lancet for so very long, there have just been so many conflicts of interest, and not least in the shape of the one we're talking about now and the one we talked about first. And I think the one that will stick in people's memories the longest, and that is Peter Daszak. Now, Peter Daszak is the head of the Eco Health Alliance. We've had our fun with Peter Daszak and talking about his pedigree in this area, but there's no doubt in my mind that Peter Daszak is both a very powerful and a very well-connected man. This person is, even at the height of his scandal, by the way, which I think he is in right now, with the entire scientific community probably looking at him as a liability, is still being hired by New York City to handle their COVID-19 response.
Yes,
so he's not completely out on his ear yet. But what we see today in the Daily Mail is actually, I think in one part vindication and in another part, I feel a great frustration about this. The Daily Mail reports today that the editor of the Lancet, the medical journal, said it actually took 16 months to publish a conflict of interest statement from Peter Daszak that linked him directly to the Wuhan lab. Now, we first reported that conflict of interest at the National Pulse in the early part of February of this year. In fact, we showed that he had been working with the Wuhan Institute of Virology for just about 18 years, and a significant amount of cash had exchanged hands, whether it was from Anthony Fauci, the NIH, and the NIAID that was going to Eco Health to help them do this research with the Wuhan lab, or whether it was other things that Eco Health was working with the Wuhan lab that were, again, underwritten in some part by Fauci. This is not a recent relationship. It is not a loose relationship. It is a deep and long-lasting affiliation between Eco Health Alliance and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, Richard Horton, the editor of Lancet, says, we knew about this, but it actually took us 16 months to convince Daszak himself that he had to disclose his conflicts of interest here. They call it competing interests here. I think it is a disgrace. I think it is a surest sign, if ever we've had one, and we've had a lot of them over the last 2 years, that there is some deep rot inside the scientific establishment. And I think at this point, I'm not sure how Horton can go on in his job. I'm not sure how the Lancet board can go on in their job. And I'm certainly not sure how Daszak can continue on in any reasonable scientific role.
Wasn't Lancet, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it these editors for the first time, I think Lancet's 175 or 200 years old, wasn't the first time that they actually advocated, they came out as an anti-Trump and that they endorsed Biden in 2020. The first time in their history, correct? They endorsed a candidate in an American presidential election. They broke, 175 years or 200 years of tradition of being a scientist and staying out of it. These people are not scientists. This is scientism. This is why what's happening in England today is inextricably linked with what is going to happen in America tomorrow. And if you can't see that, you're blind. That's the key point. This is the scientific, technocratic, globalist establishment. And they're never going to admit they're wrong, and they're never going to admit scientific facts. They're never going to talk about natural herd immunity. They're now going to spin this whole thing up right now and try to bring it all crashing down and say, but then we need another $2 trillion stimulus plan. And let's go to Beijing and kowtow to the Chinese Communist Party for their Olympics. That's where we are. And that's why we have to bring down the Biden administration in 2022. It has to be. And Mitch McConnell can't keep it on life support with any more money. Raheem, real quickly, how do you get to your podcast? How do you get to your Getter account?
Yeah, thenationalpulse.com/podcast. Thenationalpulse.com is the website. We've got loads of great stories going up today. I'm on Getter at Raheem Kassam, all the other platforms as well. Coming way hotter than Boris on Instagram, by the way. And fundrealnews.com to support our work.
By the way, fantastic work on Lancet. Historic. Jack Posobiec next in the world.